I'm Madison, 28 years old, and I'll never forget the moment my father destroyed me in front of our entire family. We were standing in his mahogany study after my sister Brittany's engagement party, champagne glasses still scattered across his desk, when he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll never own a house like your sister. Hell, you'll probably never own anything worth more than that beat-up Honda you drive." Brittany stood behind him, diamond engagement ring catching the light as she smirked, watching my humiliation unfold. What my father didn't know was that I'd been hiding a secret for years. One that would let me buy her dream house with cash before she could even secure a loan. Before we dive into this wild story of family betrayal and ultimate revenge, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family. And don't forget to subscribe because this story has more twists than you can imagine. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when I reveal the secret I'd been keeping from my family for 5 long years. Growing up in the Wellington family meant understanding your place in the hierarchy, and mine was firmly at the bottom. My father Richard had built a real estate empire from nothing, starting with one rental property and expanding to dozens of luxury developments across Connecticut. My mother Catherine lived for country club luncheons and charity galas where she could brag about our family's success. But when it came to their daughters, only one of us mattered. Brittany was 3 years older and absolutely everything my parents wanted in a child. Perfect grades, perfect hair, perfect smile that graced our Christmas cards every year. She sailed through private school while I struggled with dyslexia that my parents dismissed as laziness. When Brittany got accepted to Harvard pre-med, they threw a party that the whole neighborhood attended. When I barely graduated high school, my father's only comment was asking why I couldn't be more like my sister. Family dinners were exercises in calculated humiliation. Brittany would regale us with stories about her medical rotations, her research publications, her prestigious internship at Mass General. Meanwhile, I'd sit quietly, picking at my food while my parents hung on her every word. If I tried to contribute anything to the conversation, my father would cut me off with comments like, "Let the adults talk, Madison, or maybe you'd have something interesting to say if you actually applied yourself." The breaking point came when I was 21. I'd dropped out of community college after 2 semesters, unable to keep up with coursework while working 3 part-time jobs to support myself. My parents had cut off financial support the moment I failed to get into a 4-year university like Brittany. That night at dinner, as Brittany announced her acceptance to a competitive residency program, my father turned to me with disgust in his eyes. "Your sister is going to be a surgeon, saving lives and making something of herself," he said, his voice cold as winter. "And what are you doing? Wasting your life serving coffee and stocking shelves. You're an embarrassment to this family, Madison. I don't know where we went wrong with you, but it's clear you'll never amount to anything." I left that night with nothing but a suitcase and my beat-up Honda Civic, the car my father loved to mock. For 5 years I maintained minimal contact with my family. Holiday cards went unanswered. Birthday calls were brief and strained. They treated me like a dirty secret, the failure they didn't discuss at their social gatherings. Now, at 28, Brittany had everything Shed always wanted. Shed completed her residency in cardiothoracic surgery and landed a prestigious position at Yale New Haven Hospital. Her fiancé Derek was a wealthy orthopedic surgeon Shed met during her fellowship. Together they represented everything my parents valued: prestige, money, and social status. The engagement party had been a spectacle worthy of a magazine spread. 200 guests, a string quartet, and enough flowers to supply a funeral home. Throughout the evening, I'd listened to toast after toast praising Brittany's accomplishments while I stood in the corner, invisible in my discount dress from Target. But the worst part wasn't the party itself. It was the conversation I'd overheard between my parents and Derek's family about wedding gifts. "We've already picked out the perfect house for them," my father had announced proudly. A stunning colonial in Westchester, right in the heart of the most exclusive neighborhood. 3.8 million. But nothing's too good for our Brittany. Well, handle the down payment as an early inheritance. That house. I knew it well. We'd driven past it countless times during my childhood, and it always pressed my face to the car window, dreaming about what it would be like to live somewhere so beautiful. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brittany would get even my childhood dreams handed to her on a silver platter. What my family didn't know, what they'd never bothered to discover during their 5 years of treating me like a ghost, was that their failure daughter had become everything they claimed to value: successful, wealthy, and respected. Just not in the way they'd ever expected. It started when I was 16, spending hours in my bedroom that my parents assumed I was wasting playing video games. In reality, I was teaching myself to code. While Brittany studied anatomy, I absorbed programming languages like Python and JavaScript. While she attended galas and award ceremonies, I built my first mobile app, a simple task management system that I created to help myself stay organized despite my learning differences. That app, which I'd built as a teenager to solve my own problems, caught the attention of a small tech startup when I was 21. They offered to buy it for $50,000, money that seemed impossible at the time. I was living in a studio apartment, eating ramen noodles, and working retail jobs while my family wrote me off as hopeless. That $50,000 gave me the freedom to focus on my next project. By 23, I'd launched Streamline Solutions, a productivity platform designed specifically for people with learning disabilities and ADHD. What started as a personal tool became a revolution in accessible technology. Major corporations began licensing my software for their neurodivergent employees. When Google approached me with an acquisition offer of $2 million, I nearly fainted. But that was just the beginning. With my newfound capital, I co-founded ConnectFlow, a social media platform that prioritized authentic connections over viral content. Unlike the toxic environments dominating the market, our platform used AI to foster meaningful conversations and reduce online harassment. Within 2 years, we had 50 million active users and caught the attention of every major tech company in Silicon Valley. The bidding war was intense. Facebook offered 12 million, Twitter came in at 15, but it was a consortium of European investors who ultimately won with an offer of $15.7 million. At 25, I was worth more money than my father had accumulated in his entire career. My current venture made my previous successes look like lemonade stands. Realty IQ was an AI-powered real estate investment platform that could predict market trends with 92% accuracy. We analyzed everything from local employment data to climate change projections, giving investors unprecedented insight into property values. The platform launched 18 months ago and was already valued at $50 million, with venture capital firms begging to invest. The beautiful irony was that I'd built a fortune in the very industry my father claimed to dominate, and I'd done it better than he ever could. While he was still relying on gut instinct and old-fashioned networking, I was revolutionizing real estate with cutting-edge technology. Throughout all of this success, I made a deliberate choice to keep my achievements secret from my family. In the business world, I used my mother's maiden name, Sterling, to avoid any connection to the Wellington family reputation. Madison Sterling was a respected tech entrepreneur who gave keynote speeches at major conferences. Madison Wellington was still the family disappointment who lived in a modest apartment and drove an old car. I maintained this facade carefully. My apartment was a simple one-bedroom in a middle-class neighborhood, furnished with IKEA furniture and second-hand finds. The Honda Civic, now 12 years old, was kept running through necessity rather than nostalgia. When family members occasionally stalked my social media, they saw exactly what I wanted them to see: a struggling young woman working ordinary jobs and living paycheck to paycheck. Meanwhile, my real life was filled with board meetings, investor calls, and strategic planning sessions. I traveled first class but told my family I couldn't afford to visit for holidays. I owned a vacation home in Martha's Vineyard but claimed I was house-sitting for a friend when photos appeared online. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, but it served a purpose. I wanted to see how long my family would continue treating me as worthless when I had more money and success than any of them could imagine. The answer, as it turned out, was indefinitely. Just last month, I'd watched Brittany post on Instagram about how she was blessed to be the successful daughter while simultaneously starting a GoFundMe to help her less fortunate sister find stable employment. The final straw had been my father's lawyer calling last week about estate planning. Richard wanted to ensure that his will clearly stated everything would go to Brittany, since I'd proven incapable of managing money or making responsible decisions. The lawyer, who knew nothing about my real circumstances, had actually apologized for having to relay such harsh language. That conversation made my decision for me. It was time to stop hiding and start showing my family exactly what their failure daughter had accomplished. And I knew the perfect way to make my point, by buying Brittany's dream house out from under her with cash. The Westchester mansion my parents had promised Brittany wasn't just any house. It was a masterpiece of colonial architecture sitting on 2 acres of perfectly manicured grounds. Built in 1928 by a railroad baron, the property featured 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a kitchen that belonged in Architectural Digest. The asking price of $3.8 million was actually below market value, thanks to the seller's urgent need for a quick sale. I'd done my research thoroughly. Mrs. Patricia Thornfield, an 82-year-old widow, had inherited the property from her late husband, but could no longer maintain it. She'd already moved to an assisted living facility and needed to liquidate the asset quickly to pay for her care. The house had been on the market for only 2 weeks, but real estate agents were already scheduling multiple showings for serious buyers. Brittany had been posting about the house obsessively on social media for months, ever since she and Derek started house hunting. Her Instagram was filled with photos of the exterior taken during drive-bys, mood boards for interior decorating, and captions about manifesting my dream home. She'd even created a Pinterest board called Future Thornfield Manor with hundreds of pins showing furniture and decor she planned to buy. My father had already arranged for a private showing the following week, complete with a mortgage broker and his personal banker. Derek's family was contributing to the down payment, and my parents were handling the rest as Brittany's early inheritance. Everything was perfectly arranged for the golden couple to get their fairy tale ending. That's when I made my move. Jennifer Walsh, the listing agent, was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd been selling luxury properties for over 2 decades. When I called requesting an immediate appointment, she was initially skeptical. Young women driving 12-year-old Hondas weren't typically her clientele for multi-million-dollar properties. But when I mentioned I was prepared to make an all-cash offer, her tone shifted dramatically. "I can meet you at the property in 2 hours," she said, suddenly very accommodating. "But I should warn you, we already have several interested parties, including one family with a very compelling offer." I arrived at the mansion that afternoon and fell in love immediately. The house was even more stunning in person, with original hardwood floors, crystal chandeliers, and windows that flooded every room with natural light. The grounds included a tennis court, a pool house, and gardens that looked like something from a British estate. Standing in the grand foyer, I could picture myself hosting dinner parties and business meetings in these elegant rooms. Jennifer walked me through every detail, from the wine cellar to the master suite's private balcony. As we toured the property, I could see her reassessing me. My questions were knowledgeable, focusing on structural integrity, property taxes, and recent renovations rather than just aesthetic details. "Are you in the real estate business yourself?" she asked as we examined the updated electrical systems. "You could say that," I replied with a smile. "I'm very familiar with property values in this area." When we returned to the main foyer, Jennifer pulled out her tablet to review the current offers. "I can tell you that we have one family prepared to offer the full asking price with conventional financing. They seem very motivated, and the sellers are inclined to accept unless someone presents something significantly better." This was my moment. I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot of my primary bank account balance. Jennifer's eyes widened as she processed the numbers on the screen. "I'd like to make an offer of $4.3 million, all cash, with a close date of 2 weeks from today," I said calmly. "No financing contingencies, no inspection period, and I can provide proof of funds within 24 hours. Jennifer stared at me for a long moment, then looked back at her tablet. "May I ask what changed your mind about the price? You seemed interested at the listing price during our tour." "The house is worth more than they're asking," I explained. "In this market, with these amenities and this location, 3.8 is actually underpriced. I'm offering what the property is truly worth, and I'm willing to make it simple for Mrs. Thornfield. What I didn't mention was that paying an extra $500,000 felt like a small price for the satisfaction I was about to experience. The money meant nothing to me, but the look on my family's faces when they discovered what had happened would be priceless. Jennifer immediately called Mrs. Thornfield's attorney to relay my offer. Within an hour, I received a call back requesting proof of funds and a signed purchase agreement. The seller was interested, but given the significant cash amount involved, they needed verification that I could actually complete the transaction. The next morning, I visited my private banker at J.P. Morgan Chase, where I maintained several high-balance accounts under my business name. Marcus Chen, my relationship manager for the past 3 years, handled the verification letter personally. Had been managing my investments since the Connect Flow sale and knew exactly how much liquidity I had available. "Another real estate acquisition?" he asked as he prepared the documentation. "This will be your 4th property purchase in 2 years. This one's special," I told him. "It's personal." By noon, Jennifer had received the bank verification, and Mrs. Thornfield's attorney had accepted my offer. The house was mine, pending a 2-week closing period that I'd specifically requested to maximize the dramatic impact of my reveal. Now came the fun part, watching my family scramble to understand what had happened while I prepared for the most satisfying confrontation of my life. The first sign of panic came through Brittany's Instagram stories. Usually perfectly curated posts about her engagement planning and surgical cases were replaced with increasingly frantic updates about the house situation. "Prayers needed. Some investor is trying to steal our dream home," appeared over a photo of the mansion at sunset. Within hours, the post had dozens of sympathetic comments from friends and family members expressing outrage on her behalf. My mother called an emergency family meeting for Sunday dinner, something that hadn't happened since my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago. I almost declined the invitation, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see how they'd handle this crisis, especially since they had no idea I was behind it. The dining room felt like a war room when I arrived. My father sat at the head of the mahogany table, his face red with frustration. My mother paced near the windows, her usual composure cracked. Brittany clutched Derek's hand while dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the victim role she'd perfected over the years. Even my older brother Nathan had driven up from Manhattan for the occasion. "This is corporate warfare," my father announced as soon as I sat down. "Some tech billionaire thinks they can waltz into our deal and throw money around like it's nothing. Well, they picked the wrong family to mess with." Derek leaned forward, his surgeon's precision evident even in casual conversation. "I've been researching the buyer. The offer came from something called Sterling Holdings, but the actual individual behind it is very well hidden. Whoever this is has serious money and knows how to keep their identity private." I almost laughed at the irony. They were sitting 3 feet away from the mysterious buyer they were so desperate to identify, yet none of them considered for a second that their family failure could be involved in a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction. "I think Madison might know something," Brittany said suddenly, turning her tear-stained face toward me. "She's been acting weird lately. Different. Like she's hiding something." All eyes turned to me, and I felt a familiar surge of the anxiety that had plagued my childhood. Being the center of attention in this family was never a good thing, but this time, I had a secret weapon: the truth. "What could I possibly know about some rich investor?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I can barely afford my rent, remember?" My cousin Timothy, who'd have been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I saw you last month at Chez Laurent, and you weren't exactly eating ramen noodles. You were with some very expensive-looking people, wearing clothes I've never seen before." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Chez Laurent was a 5-star restaurant where entrees started at $80 and reservations were booked months in advance. It was also where I'd been dining with potential investors for my latest startup expansion. "Maybe you saw someone who looked like me," I said carefully. "Or maybe I was catering an event there. You know I pick up side jobs when I can." My father's eyes narrowed. He'd built his fortune by reading people, and something in my response had triggered his suspicions. "Timothy, what exactly did you see? Who was she with?" Timothy looked uncomfortable now, realizing head opened a can of worms. I don't know, just some business types. They looked like lawyers or investors. Madison seemed very comfortable with them, like she belonged there. Brittany's tears dried up immediately, replaced by the calculating look she got when she sensed weakness. That's interesting, isn't it? Our little sister, who supposedly works retail jobs, having dinner with investors at the most expensive restaurant in the state. People have dinner meetings all the time, I protested. Maybe they were discussing a job opportunity. What kind of job opportunity involves dinner at Chez Laurent? Derek interjected, his voice taking on the condescending tone he used with medical students. The average table there costs more than most people's weekly salary. My mother stopped pacing and fixed me with a stare that could freeze lava. Madison, is there something you need to tell us? Because if you're somehow involved in sabotaging your sister's happiness, I will never forgive you. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. They still didn't believe I could actually be the buyer, but they suspected I might have somehow interfered with their plans. In their minds, I was capable of petty sabotage but not legitimate success. I would never try to hurt Brittany, I said, which was technically true. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to prove a point about their own blindness and cruelty. My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I'm going to make some calls. If someone thinks they can outmaneuver Richard Wellington in real estate, they're about to get a very expensive education. What kind of calls? Nathan asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. I have contacts at every major bank in the region, my father replied grimly. Financing can disappear very quickly when the right people make the right phone calls. And I know everyone worth knowing in Connecticut real estate. This Sterling Holdings is about to discover that money isn't everything. As my family began plotting their counterattack against me without realizing it, I felt a mixture of excitement and sadness. They were about to go to war with their own daughter, using all their influence and connections to destroy someone they claimed to love. The fact that they were willing to do this proved everything I'd believed about their conditional love and shallow values. Derek pulled out his phone and began scrolling through contacts. I know some people at the state medical board who have connections in the banking industry. If this buyer has any skeletons in their closet, well, find them. And I can use my social media following to put pressure on them, Brittany added, her voice gaining strength as she shifted from victim to aggressor. If we can identify who's behind this, we can make their life very uncomfortable. I excused myself shortly after, claiming I had to work early the next morning. As I drove away from my childhood home, I realized this was probably the last family dinner I'd attend as Madison Wellington, the failure. The next time I saw them, I'd be revealing myself as Madison Sterling, the woman who'd just outmaneuvered them all. The private investigator my family hired was more thorough than I'd expected. Within 48 hours, Lucas Martinez had traced Sterling Holdings back to its primary business address, identified the company's major assets, and discovered enough financial information to send my family into complete meltdown mode. I learned about their findings through Nathan, who called me Tuesday night in a state of barely controlled panic. Madison, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning? This is about the house situation, and it's more serious than we thought. I agreed to meet him at a Starbucks near his office, curious to see how much they'd uncovered and whether they'd finally connected the dots. Nathan looked exhausted when he arrived, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his tie askew. He ordered a triple espresso and sat down heavily across from me. The buyer is someone called M. Sterling, he began without preamble. According to the PI, this person has a net worth of over $50 million. They own properties in Martha's Vineyard, Manhattan, and Miami. They've sold multiple tech companies and currently run something called Realty IQ, which is apparently revolutionizing real estate investing. I sipped my latte and tried to look appropriately shocked. Wow, that's someone with serious money. It gets worse, Nathan continued. This M. Sterling person has been deliberately operating under the radar. They use shell companies, private banking relationships, and NDAs to keep their identity hidden. But here's the really weird part. The PI thinks they might have some connection to our family. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. What kind of connection? The timeline is suspicious. M. Sterling started making major business moves right around the time you left home 5 years ago. And some of the shell companies are registered to addresses in areas where you've lived. The PI thinks you might have somehow been involved with this person, maybe as an employee or assistant. I almost laughed at how close they were to the truth while still being completely wrong. You think I work for some secret millionaire? Nathan, look at my car. Look at my apartment. If I worked for someone that wealthy, don't you think my life would be different? That's what doesn't make sense, he admitted. But Dad is convinced there's a connection. Has been making calls all morning, trying to use his influence to block the sale somehow. What Nathan didn't know was that those calls had already backfired spectacularly. My banker Marcus had contacted me that morning to report that someone was making inquiries about my financial position and asking questions about the source of my funds. When Marcus mentioned that the calls seemed to be coming from someone claiming to represent a competing buyer, it asked him to trace the source. The calls were originating from my father's office. There's something else, Nathan said, lowering his voice. Dad hired a different kind of investigator. Someone who specializes in financial crimes and fraud. Has convinced that this M. Sterling person is dirty somehow. That the money isn't legitimate. This was escalating beyond simple family drama into potential legal harassment. My father was so determined to get that house for Brittany that he was willing to launch a criminal investigation against a stranger he viewed as an obstacle. What if the money is legitimate? I asked carefully. What if this M. Sterling person earned their wealth legally and just wants to buy a house? Nathan's expression hardened. Then they picked the wrong house. That property belongs to Brittany. She's been planning her life around it. Dad promised it to her, and Derek's family has already made financial commitments based on that promise. Some tech brat with more money than sense isn't going to destroy my sister's dreams. The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. Nathan had always been the most reasonable member of my family, the one he'd hoped might eventually see through their favoritism. But here he was, referring to me as a tech brat while defending Brittany's right to a house shed never earned. Brittany's dreams? I repeated. It's just a house, Nathan. There are other beautiful properties available. It's not just a house, he snapped. It's a symbol of everything she's worked for. She's dedicated her life to helping people, to making a difference. She deserves to have something beautiful and perfect, unlike some people who just stumble into money they haven't earned. The irony was overwhelming. Brittany, who'd had every advantage handed to her from birth, supposedly deserved a mansion because of her hard work. Meanwhile, I, who'd built multiple successful companies from nothing while supporting myself, was characterized as someone who'd stumbled into unearned wealth. That afternoon, I received a call from Jennifer Walsh with an update that confirmed my family's escalating tactics. I wanted to let you know that we've been receiving some unusual inquiries about your purchase, she said carefully. Several people claiming to represent other buyers have been asking questions about your financing and requesting documentation that's really none of their business. What kind of questions? They want to know about your employment history, the source of your down payment, and whether you have any criminal background. One person even suggested that we should delay the closing to allow for additional due diligence on your financial position. My family was trying to sabotage my own real estate purchase through official channels, using their connections and influence to create obstacles. They were so desperate to stop the mysterious M. Sterling that they were willing to interfere with legal business transactions. How are you handling these inquiries? I asked. I'm telling them to mind their own business. Jennifer replied firmly. You've provided all required documentation, your funds have been verified by a major bank, and your offer is completely legitimate. If someone else is upset about losing out on the property, that's their problem. That evening, I received a text from Brittany that made my blood boil. I know you're involved in this somehow, Madison. I don't know how or why, but I can feel it. When I find out what you've done, there will be consequences. The threat was unmistakable. My own sister was essentially promising to retaliate against me for a crime I hadn't committed, based on nothing more than her intuition and entitlement. She was so convinced that she deserved that house, that anyone who interfered must be acting out of malice. I was beginning to realize that revealing my success wouldn't just shock my family, it would destroy them. Their entire worldview was built on the premise that success followed predictable patterns of education, networking, and social climbing. The idea that their rejected daughter had outperformed all of them using methods they didn't understand would shatter their sense of superiority. But I was no longer interested in protecting their feelings. They'd made their choice to treat me as expendable, and now they were actively working to sabotage someone they didn't even know was me. It was time to show them exactly what their failure daughter had accomplished. The third betrayal came from someone I'd trusted completely. Sandra Morrison had been my best friend since elementary school, the one person who'd stayed in contact throughout my years of family exile. She was also the only person outside my business circle who knew hints about my real financial situation. I discovered her betrayal by accident while reviewing my company's social media analytics. Realty IQ's Instagram account had experienced an unusual spike in activity, with someone repeatedly checking our posts and trying to access our private business information. When I traced the IP address, it led back to Sandra's apartment. I confronted her that Friday over what I thought would be our regular coffee meetup. The moment I mentioned the social media activity, Sandra's face crumpled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Madison. I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Brittany approached me last week. She said she knew you were hiding something big, and she offered me $5,000 to find out what it was." The betrayal felt like a knife to the chest. Sandra was struggling financially after her divorce, working 2 jobs to support her daughter, but I'd never imagined she'd sell out our friendship for money. $5,000? I repeated numbly. "That's what our 15-year friendship was worth?" "She said you'd understand eventually," Sandra continued, her voice breaking. "She told me that you were probably involved in something illegal, and that the family was just trying to protect you from getting in trouble. She made it sound like she was helping you. Classic Brittany manipulation. Even when orchestrating betrayal, she positioned herself as the concerned sister looking out for my welfare." Sandra, desperate for money and convinced by Brittany's authoritative medical degree and social status, had fallen for the performance completely. "What did you tell her?" Sandra pulled out her phone and showed me a series of screenshots she'd taken of my social media posts over the past 2 years. Innocent photos that I'd thought were carefully curated to hide my success had been analyzed and cataloged. Pictures of business dinners labeled as job interviews. Photos from my Martha's Vineyard house described as house-sitting. Even my casual mentions of travel reframed as evidence of mysterious income. "She wanted to know about your job, your apartment, who you spend time with," Sandra explained. "I thought I was helping prove you weren't doing anything wrong. But the more questions she asked, the more I realized she wasn't trying to protect you. She was building a case against you." The worst part was that Sandra's information had given my family enough pieces to start seeing the bigger picture. They still didn't know I was Sterling, but they now suspected I was involved in the tech industry at a higher level than I'd admitted. That suspicion had led to the 4th betrayal, which I learned about through my business partner, Jake Morrison, Sandra's ex-husband and one of the few people who knew about both my family situation and my professional success. Jake called me in a panic Tuesday morning with news that made my blood run cold. "Madison, we have a problem. Someone's trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Realty IQ," he said without preamble. I just got off the phone with our legal team. A shell company backed by some Connecticut investors has been quietly buying up shares from our smaller stakeholders. My hands went numb as I processed this information. Who's behind the shell company? That's the weird part. The paperwork is incredibly sophisticated, but we traced it back to a partnership between a real estate developer named Richard Wellington and a group of medical investors led by someone named Derek something. Does that mean anything to you? My father and Derek were trying to destroy my company. They'd connected enough dots to realize that Sterling and Madison Wellington might be the same person, and their response was to attack my livelihood directly. They were willing to commit corporate warfare against their own daughter rather than accept that I might have succeeded without their approval. How much of the company do they control now? About 15%, which isn't enough for a takeover but enough to create serious problems. They're demanding board representation, financial audits, and access to our proprietary algorithms. If we resist, They're threatening to file complaints with the SEC about potential fraud. The SEC complaints were pure harassment, but they could tie up my company in legal proceedings for months while my family tried to find evidence of wrongdoing that didn't exist. They were using their wealth and connections to weaponize the regulatory system against me. But the final betrayal was the one that nearly broke me completely. That afternoon, I received a call from my family's longtime lawyer, Robert Stevens, who'd been handling Wellington family legal affairs for over 20 years. I'd known him since childhood and remembered him as a kind man who'd always treated me with more respect than my own parents. "Madison, I need to discuss something sensitive with you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Your father has asked me to prepare documentation that would formally disinherit you and remove you from any family trusts or estate planning." I sat down heavily, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Disinherit me? Why?" "He believes you've been involved in fraudulent business activities and that you've been lying to the family about your income and associations. He's convinced that you're either working with criminals or engaged in some kind of financial crime yourself." The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. My father, who'd made his fortune through questionable real estate deals and political connections, was accusing me of financial crimes because I'd built legitimate businesses he couldn't understand. What evidence does he have? Honestly, nothing concrete, but he's hired investigators who claim you've been living beyond your means and associating with suspicious individuals. Combined with the timing of this real estate situation involving M. Sterling, he's convinced there's a connection. Robert paused, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice. "Madison, I've known you since you were a child. I don't believe for a second that you're involved in anything illegal. But your father is determined to cut all legal and financial ties with you. I wanted to give you advance warning before the paperwork is filed." I thanked Robert for the heads up and hung up, feeling completely isolated. My family wasn't just rejecting me, they were actively trying to destroy every aspect of my life. They'd turned my childhood friend against me, attacked my business, and now planned to formally disown me, all because I'd dared to succeed in ways they didn't approve of. But their campaign against me had one fatal flaw. They still didn't know who they were really fighting. They thought they were attacking some mysterious outsider who threatened their plans. In reality, they were declaring war on their own daughter, proving definitively that their love had always been conditional on my failure. The closing on the house was scheduled for the following Monday. It was time to stop hiding and start fighting back. My salvation came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patricia Thornfield called me personally Friday evening, her elderly voice trembling with indignation. "My dear, I need to warn you about something quite disturbing that happened today." Mrs. Thornfield went on to describe a visit she'd received that afternoon from two men who'd identified themselves as representatives of a concerned family who wanted to purchase her home. They'd offered her an additional $200,000 above my agreed price, but with conditions that had made her deeply uncomfortable. "The older man, Richard something, was very aggressive," she explained. "He kept insisting that I should reject your offer because you weren't a suitable buyer for the neighborhood. He suggested that your money came from questionable sources and that selling to you would bring down property values." My father had actually visited an 82-year-old widow in her assisted living facility to badmouth me personally. The depth of his desperation was both shocking and revealing. The younger man was even worse, Mrs. Thornfield continued. "Derek, I think his name was. He had the audacity to suggest that I should be concerned about your mental health and stability. He claimed to be a doctor and said he had professional concerns about your fitness to own such a significant property." The fact that Derek had used his medical credentials to attack my mental health felt like a violation that went beyond simple family conflict. He was weaponizing his professional status to spread lies about someone he'd never even met. "How did you respond to them?" I asked. Mrs. Thornfield's voice gained strength and steel. "I told them that in my 82 years, I've learned to recognize bullies and manipulators. Their behavior toward you reminded me of my late husband's family, who tried to control me after he passed. I showed them the door and informed them that the sale would proceed as planned." Her next words gave me chills. "My dear, I don't know what your relationship is with these people, but I recognize the signs of family abuse when I see them. I survived 40 years of being controlled by my in-laws, who thought I wasn't good enough for their son. I'll be damned if I help another family destroy a young woman's dreams. Mrs. Thornfield's support felt like a lifeline. Here was someone who saw through my family's manipulation and chose to stand with me despite the pressure they'd applied. Her validation meant more than she could possibly know. But Mrs. Thornfield wasn't my only unexpected ally. Jake called me Saturday morning with news that our hostile takeover problem had been resolved in the most satisfying way possible. "Remember our silent partner from the Connect Flow deal?" he asked, barely containing his excitement. "The European consortium that helped fund our expansion? Well, they've been watching this situation develop, and they're not amused by someone trying to manipulate their investment. The consortium had responded to my family's corporate attack with overwhelming force. Within 24 hours, they'd purchased enough additional shares to give us controlling interest again, filed complaints with financial regulators about market manipulation, and threatened serious legal action against anyone interfering with their business interests. Your father's shell company just got dismantled by people with serious international connections," Jake continued. "They've withdrawn their demands, sold their shares at a loss, and essentially disappeared from our radar. I don't know what they thought they were dealing with, but they picked a fight with the wrong company. The cosmic justice of the situation was beautiful. My father, who'd built his reputation on intimidating smaller players in Connecticut real estate, had inadvertently picked a fight with multinational investors who viewed his tactics as amateur hour harassment. But I wasn't satisfied with just defending myself. It was time to go on the offensive. I started by having my legal team investigate my family's business practices over the past decade. What they discovered was a pattern of questionable dealings that explained how my father had maintained his wealth despite the declining Connecticut real estate market. Over-leveraged properties, creative financing arrangements, and tax strategies that bordered on aggressive planning had created a house of cards that was more fragile than anyone realized. Armed with this information, I made a strategic leak to Financial Times reporter who specialized in regional real estate coverage. The resulting article, titled "Connecticut Developer's Empire Built on Shaky Foundation," detailed Richard Wellington's precarious financial position without mentioning the source of the information. The article hit like a bomb in Connecticut's tight-knit real estate community. Within hours, my father's business relationships began unraveling as partners questioned the stability of his various ventures. Banks started calling loans, investors demanded additional collateral, and several pending deals fell through as counterparties backed away from association with the Wellington name. Derek's response to the crisis revealed everything I needed to know about his character. According to Nathan, who called me in a panic Wednesday night, Derek had immediately started distancing himself from the family. His contribution to the house down payment was suddenly tied up in other investments, and he was suggesting that he and Brittany might want to start smaller with their first home purchase. "Hez, abandoning ship," Nathan admitted with bitter resignation. The moment Dad's business problems became public, Derek started making excuses about why they should postpone major financial commitments. Brittany's response was even more satisfying. Her social media presence, previously filled with confidence and entitlement, shifted to desperate damage control. She posted long explanations about how family businesses face challenges and how she was standing by her father during difficult times. The comments from her social circle revealed how quickly public opinion could shift when financial stability was questioned. But the most telling response came from my mother, who called me directly for the first time in over a year. "Madison, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "This situation has gotten out of hand, and I think it's time we address some things that should have been discussed long ago." For a moment, I thought she might be ready to acknowledge the family's treatment of me and offer some kind of apology. Then she continued, "I know you've been angry with us, and perhaps we haven't always been as supportive as we could have been. But this vendetta you're pursuing against your father's business is going too far. Whatever point you're trying to make, you're destroying the family's reputation in the process." Even facing financial ruin, my mother couldn't acknowledge that they'd done anything wrong. In her mind, I was the aggressor pursuing a vendetta rather than someone defending herself against their attacks. "I haven't done anything to Dad's business," I replied truthfully. "If his financial position is unstable, That's the result of his own decisions. Don't lie to me, Madison, she snapped. This M. Sterling person starts interfering with our plans, and suddenly your father's business is under attack. The timing is too convenient to be coincidental. She was right about the timing, of course, but she still couldn't conceive that I might actually be M. Sterling rather than just associated with them somehow. The closing was scheduled for Monday morning. I had one weekend left to prepare for the revelation that would change everything between us forever. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a New England autumn day. I dressed carefully for the closing, choosing a tailored navy suit that commanded respect without being ostentatious. At 9:30, I arrived at the law offices of Bradford and Associates, where Mrs. Thornfield's attorney had arranged to handle the transaction. What I hadn't expected was to find my entire family already assembled in the reception area. My father sat rigidly in a leather chair, his face red with barely controlled anger. My mother perched beside him, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon. Brittany paced near the windows, her usual composure replaced by frantic energy, while Derek stood apart from the group, checking his phone with obvious discomfort. Even Nathan had taken time off work to be there, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What are you doing here?" Brittany demanded the moment she saw me. "I have business to attend to," I replied calmly, approaching the receptionist's desk. My father stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "This is too much of a coincidence, Madison. You showing up here on the same day some mysterious buyer is finalizing a purchase that destroys your sister's dreams." "Maybe I'm here for a completely different reason," I suggested, signing in with the receptionist. "Miss Sterling?" the receptionist asked, reading my signature. "Mr. Bradford is ready for you in conference room A." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as the pieces finally clicked into place in my family's minds. The name Sterling. The timing. My presence at the law office. My complete lack of surprise at seeing them there. "Oh my God," Brittany whispered. "Sterling. Madison Sterling." I turned to face them fully, no longer hiding behind careful words and deflection. "Hello, family." Surprise. My father's face went through several color changes before settling on an alarming shade of purple. "That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You can't even afford a decent car." "Actually, I can afford several decent cars," I replied pleasantly. "I just chose to drive my Honda because it reminded me where I came from. Though I think it's time for an upgrade." Derek stepped forward, his medical training apparently helping him process shock faster than the others. "You're M. Sterling? The tech entrepreneur who's been buying properties across 3 states? Among other things?" "Yes." Brittany's shock transformed into rage with startling speed. "You did this deliberately. You knew about the house, you knew how much it meant to me, and you bought it just to hurt me." "Actually, I bought it because it's a beautiful property that I can afford and wanted to own," I corrected. "Your emotional attachment to something that was never yours isn't my problem." My mother found her voice at last. "How is this possible? We know how you live. We've seen your apartment, your job, your life. You can't possibly have $50 million. "You've seen exactly what I wanted you to see," I explained patiently. "For 5 years, I've been successful in business while maintaining the fiction that I was struggling financially. I wanted to see how you'd treat me if you thought I was worthless." "And what did you discover?" Nathan asked quietly. I looked at him, the brother who'd once built pillow forts with me and taught me to ride a bike, and felt a wave of sadness for what we'd lost. "I discovered that your love was always conditional. You loved the idea of me succeeding in ways you approved of, but you had no interest in actually supporting me through failure or struggle. And when I did succeed, in ways you didn't understand or value, you tried to destroy me rather than celebrate my achievements." Jennifer Walsh appeared in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in the law office lobby. "Miss Sterling? We're ready to proceed with the closing whenever you are." "It'll be right there," I told her, then turned back to my family. "The house is beautiful, by the way. I think you'll be very happy there." My father found his voice at last, and it was filled with venom he'd never heard before. "If you think this changes anything, you're wrong. Money doesn't erase what you are, Madison. You're still the same failure who couldn't make it through college, who embarrassed this family for years." "You're right," I agreed. "Money doesn't change who I am fundamentally. I'm still the same person who learned to code in her bedroom while you were praising Brittany for memorizing anatomy. I'm still the woman who built multiple successful companies while supporting herself through retail jobs. And I'm still your daughter, even though you've spent the last hour proving you never deserved that title." Brittany made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. "Please, Madison, this house means everything to me. I'll do anything. I'll apologize for how we treated you. I'll make sure the family treats you better. Just please don't take this away from me." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old Madison, the one who'd always tried to please everyone and avoid conflict. Then I remembered Derek using his medical credentials to attack my mental health. I remembered my father trying to destroy my business. I remembered Sandra selling out our friendship for $5,000. "Brittany, you had 28 years to treat me like family. You chose not to. This house was never yours to lose." I walked toward conference room A, where Mrs. Thornfield's attorney waited with the closing documents. Behind me, I heard my family erupt into shouting, accusations flying between them as they tried to process what had just happened. 30 minutes later, I walked out of the law office as the legal owner of the most beautiful house I'd ever seen. My family was gone, presumably to regroup and plan their next move, but I was done playing defense. It was time to build the life I'd always wanted, with or without the Wellingtons' approval. 3 months after the closing, I stood in the grand foyer of what everyone now called the Sterling Mansion, watching contractors put the finishing touches on my renovation. The house had been beautiful before, but it made it truly mine with modern technology integration, a state-of-the-art home office, and guest quarters designed for the family I hoped to build someday. Mrs. Thornfield had become an unexpected mentor and friend. She visited monthly for tea in my library, sharing stories about building her own life after years of family control. Her husband had left her wealthy, but his family had spent decades trying to convince her she wasn't smart enough to manage money. Sound familiar? "You know, dear," she said during one of our conversations, "the most valuable thing you can own isn't property or money. It's the certainty that you're enough, just as you are." My father's business had indeed collapsed, just as the Financial Times article had predicted. The Wellington real estate empire, built on leverage and borrowed time, crumbled when partners and lenders lost confidence. My parents had been forced to sell their family home and move to a modest condo in a less prestigious neighborhood. Brittany's engagement to Derek had ended exactly as I'd expected. The moment my family's financial problems became public, had discovered urgent reasons to postpone their wedding. She was now dating a different surgeon, this one with a more stable family background and better financial prospects. Nathan had surprised me by reaching out 6 weeks after the closing, had driven to my house uninvited, standing on my doorstep with flowers and an expression of genuine remorse. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About everything, about you, about what success looks like, about what family should mean." His apology felt authentic in a way that Brittany's closing day desperation hadn't. Nathan had done his own research after learning about my business success, reading articles about my companies, and understanding for the first time what I'd actually accomplished. "I let Dad and Mom convince me that there was only one path to success," he continued. "College, graduate school, traditional career progression. When you didn't follow that path, I assumed you'd failed rather than considering that you might have found a better way." I'd invited him in for coffee, and we'd talked for 3 hours. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a beginning. My mother had made her own attempt at reconciliation, though hers felt more strategic than sincere. She'd called requesting a lunch meeting to discuss family healing. What she actually wanted was to understand my financial position and explore whether I might be willing to help with my father's debt problems. "Family takes care of family," she'd said over salad at a restaurant she clearly couldn't afford. "Whatever happened in the past, we're still your parents." "Actually, family supports family," I'd corrected. "They don't try to destroy each other the moment someone becomes successful in unexpected ways." My father had made no overtures toward reconciliation, which honestly came as a relief. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit had been wrong about me, and my peace of mind couldn't handle his continued presence in my life. Realty IQ had thrived despite my family's attempted interference. The publicity around the hostile takeover attempt had actually generated positive attention from other investors who admired our resilience. WED expanded into 3 new markets and were being courted by major tech companies interested in acquisition. But the most satisfying development had been Brittany's social media evolution. Her Instagram, once filled with entitlement and superiority, now featured humility posts about learning from difficult times and growing through challenges. Shed even posted a carefully worded acknowledgement that Shed underestimated my unique path to success. It'd been invited to speak at several tech conferences about entrepreneurship and overcoming family obstacles to business success. My story resonated with other entrepreneurs who'd built companies despite lack of traditional support systems. The speaking engagements led to something I hadn't expected: a book deal. Publishers were interested in my story about building wealth while hiding it from a judgmental family. The working title was The Sterling Deception: How I Built an Empire While My Family Thought I Was a Failure. But perhaps the most meaningful change had been in my daily life. I'd hired Mrs. Thornfield's granddaughter Emma as my executive assistant, giving her the opportunity to learn business skills while helping an elderly woman I cared about. Emma was brilliant, ambitious, and reminded me of myself at her age. It also started a scholarship program for students from difficult family situations who showed entrepreneurial promise. The Sterling Foundation provided both financial support and mentorship for young people whose families didn't understand or value their ambitions. Last week, I'd received an unexpected visitor. Sandra Morrison had appeared at my door with tears in her eyes and a check for $5,000. "I can't keep this money," Shed said. "What I did was wrong, regardless of my financial situation. I sold out our friendship, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I'd torn up the check and invited her in for coffee. Her betrayal had hurt deeply, but I understood the desperation that had driven it. We weren't ready to be close friends again, but we'd taken the first steps toward forgiveness. The house had become more than just a symbol of my success. It was the foundation for building the family I'd always wanted. Not the biological family that had rejected me, but the chosen family of people who valued loyalty, authenticity, and mutual support. I'd started hosting monthly dinner parties for entrepreneurs, artists, and other creative people who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. These gatherings had the warmth and acceptance that my childhood family dinners had always lacked. Standing in my library this evening, surrounded by books about business, technology, and personal growth, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The scared, insecure girl who'd left her family home 5 years ago had grown into a woman who knew her own worth. The most important lesson I'd learned wasn't about money or business success. It was about the difference between earning respect and demanding it, between conditional love and genuine acceptance, between family by blood and family by choice. My parents had taught me that love could be withdrawn when I failed to meet their expectations. My chosen family had taught me that real love celebrates authentic success, supports you through genuine failure, and never asks you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. The Wellington family had lost more than money when they rejected me. They'd lost the opportunity to know who I really was, to share in my genuine accomplishments, and to be part of something bigger than their narrow definitions of success. But I'd gained something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that I was worthy of love and respect exactly as I was, that my path was valid even when others couldn't understand it, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to leave people behind who can't appreciate your worth. So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt undervalued by people who should have supported you? Have you achieved success in ways that others didn't recognize or respect? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Hit that like button if this story resonated with your own experiences of proving doubters wrong. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family obstacles and building success on your own terms. And please share this with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's limited vision of what success should look like. Thank you for joining me on this journey from rejection to redemption. Remember that your value doesn't depend on other people's approval. Your path doesn't have to look like anyone else's, And sometimes the family that matters most is the one you choose to build. Here's to all of us who've ever been underestimated and then proved everyone wrong. You're stronger than you know, more capable than they believed, and worthy of all the success you're brave enough to create.